Session-16, January 15, 1964. They said, "Yes, good evening." Ralph asked, "How are you this evening, Seth?" They said, "Just fine." Ralph asked, "Anything in particular you want to talk about?" They said, "No, light is a mental enzyme." Ralph said, "Credit my subconscious then, for I didn't sit down and figure it out." They said, "Yes, your subconscious." Ralph asked, "Seth, why do Jane's eyes appear to be darker and more luminous now when she's delivering your messages?" They said, "Concentration." Yet, ego is relaxed. The cat focuses upon one thing at a time even though it has no strong ego. So Jane concentrates while I give her the messages, even though it is not her ego which is concentrating. You get a subconscious focus different in many ways from conscious concentration. In this state, the attention is focused inward rather than outward, and it is the inner senses more than the outer that are being exercised. The cat is doing the same thing in his way that Jane is, and in a particular situation, you are thinking of his inner senses. That is, the cats were focused in my direction. As far as light being a mental enzyme, this is true. I'm pleased that you came forward with this yourself. There are other mental enzymes, of course. Whether we will go into this during tonight's session, I don't know. The main mental enzymes create senses on the physical plane in order that they may be recognized and appreciated by the physical being. The mental enzymes are the same basically throughout the universe, but their materializations on a particular plane are determined by the properties inherent in the plane itself. The quality called light on this plane could just as well appear as sound in another, and for that matter, even on this plane light can be changed into sound and sound into light. It is always interaction which is important. Even the mental enzymes themselves are interchangeable as far as the principle behind them is concerned, though for practical purposes they maintain separate and distinct qualities in their materializations in one plane. That is why it is possible for some human beings to experience sound as color, or to see color in sound. Granted, this is not a characteristic experience, but if the mental enzymes were not interchangeable in principle, then this experience would not be possible for any. Light would never be heard, for example. Sound would never be seen. Nor is color usually heard, nor sound usually seen. In practical terms, these mental enzymes must, of course, and do, give a predictable, more or less dependable result. The reason why they must is understandable. The thing to remember is that this interchangeability can occur and is therefore an ability or property of the mental enzyme in general. On your plane, the action of the mental enzyme would appear to be more or less inflexible, more or less static, irreversible, and permanent. This, of course, is not the case. It is a view caused by the difficulty of getting any perspective about the particular plane which you happen to inhabit. Because mental enzymes seem to give the same effects most of the time in your physical universe, your scientists for years blithely labeled these as the laws of nature. That is, the apparent laws of cause and effect. Now because if you excuse the palm, a certain cause will usually give a certain effect in your physical universe. You may be justified in saying that these apparent results are laws that operate within your physical universe, but please stay in your own backyard. What I am trying to say is that there are apparent rules of cause and effect, but the same causes do not always give the same effects. There is much more that I want to say along these lines. If you will perhaps consider again our wires and mazes, I have said, if you'll excuse the brief reminder that these imaginary wires are composed of solidified vitality. They are the living stuff of the universe even as they form its boundaries and seem to divide it into labyrinthian ways, like the inside of a honeycomb. The place within the tiny wires, that is, the planes formed by the connections and interconnections of our imaginary wires, come into the sphere of each different plane and take on the form inherent on the plane itself. Therefore, these wires, if we may use a small analogy, will grow thick or thin, or change color completely. Like some chameleon-like animal constantly camouflaging its true appearance by taking on the outward manifestations of each neighboring forest territory. Then, too, the inhabitants of any particular plane are chameleon-like, animal-like. Solidified vitality wires do not look like boundaries or divisions. They appear exactly of the same type as the other materializations on that particular plane. The inhabitants see only the camouflage. They then accept this particular camouflage as a definite rule of nature, never realizing that just beyond their eyesight and just beyond all their outer senses, this familiar tamed animal of a law changes appearance completely. So completely, in fact, is the transformation as to be almost, in some cases, unrecognizable. However, by seeing beneath the camouflage in any one case, you see beneath the camouflage in all cases. What these wires are, therefore, that seem to divide our planes and that appear so differently in one plane than they do in another, are solidified vitality whose camouflaging action is determined by mental enzymes. Now you will understand why I said earlier that sound can be seen and color can be heard. There are many diverse examples along these lines. If you will forgive me, Joseph, at the risk, and I do mean the risk, of becoming boring, I would like to repeat briefly. Mental enzymes allow the solidified vitality to change its form. If I said this in the beginning before this discussion, it would have choked you to swallow it. Your light is a mental enzyme tipped me off that you were ready for this discussion. Needless to say, solidified vitality and mental enzymes are dependent upon each other in many ways. The enzyme part of our little equation, therefore, permits vitality to operate successfully under diverse mental and physical situations, and to form the basis for each particular plane. I suggest you take a break. I am very pleased with your progress this evening so far. Incidentally, I do have access to your conscious and unconscious minds, but only when you permit it. Consciously, neither of you are aware of the subtle permission or refusal of permission that you yourselves give. And as far as suggestion is concerned, since you both have been reading along these lines, there is a point where the most suggestible of persons is beyond reach. It is unfortunately true that the dominant present ego can be degraded on your plane to an amazing degree, through, for example, brainwashing and so forth. However, this situation, while bad enough, is not as dire as you might think. When you are considering the human personality as a thing of this time only and destroyed by that, then is disintegration for any reason seems truly a tragic thing, and it is tragic. Nevertheless, when you think in terms of the entity and its various personality manifestations throughout your Earth time, then you realize that the basic self, the entity, cannot be destroyed in any particular Earth life. You are, I know, acquainted with the idea of regeneration. If you will imagine the various reincarnated personalities, and this is a most unpleasant analogy, as the various things and other faculties of entity, then you will see why if one fragment is disintegrated, it can be regenerated in the same manner that a physical cell of your body can be regenerated. This is actually not as bad an analogy as I first thought, in that oftentimes a particular personality will be like the right arm of the entity as a whole, while another particular personality will have both feet on the ground. To get back, however, to the original point I wish to make, there is a point beyond which the most suggestible personality will be beyond reach. No matter what the circumstances are, manifestations of the personality may follow the lines that suggestion commands. This is bad enough, but it only means that the personality has been forced to change its mode of action in the physical world. The personality seems shattered because the actions seem so chained. And here again, we have your cause and effect misapplied. The basic personality, that is, the primary personality, has not been changed and will not change except through the personality itself. What may occur is that lesser fragments of the personality that were at one time possible competing elements for the dominant personality take over. This may come to the foreground in bad circumstances, and actually save the basic personality itself from what would certainly be disintegration. It is as if the basic personality throws the dirty dogs born after born, all the while saving the real morsel. I certainly do hesitate to go into your flying saucer question this evening. It is not complicated in itself, but complicated in the telling. I do want to mention one little point with which you might be concerned or pleased. You are both experiencing at this point, and have experienced in the past, the distorted time element, or so-called foreshortened time that you read about in your books on hypnotism. If you will notice the time by the clock, you will see how much material I have given you in something like 15 minutes. I do like to save a few little surprises like this for you now and then. The strange thing, incidentally, about your flying saucers is not that they appear, but that you can see them. As science advances on various planes, the inhabitants of the various planes learn to travel between planes occasionally, while carrying with them the manifestations of their home station. This is complicated in the theory. As I mentioned, they carry their own particular camouflage with them. You recognize it as not your own. Taking off at right angles involves another one of your natural laws, which are not natural laws, but seem to be because this is how things look from where you are. I will take this up at a later date if I do not go into it in the later part of this discussion. You may as well take a break while you have the chance. Robert, you can stop playing Ring Around the Rosie. The inner senses are actually the channels through which the entire composition of any particular plane is appreciated and actually maintained. It is through the inner senses that the mental insights are enabled to act upon the vitality which is, as I have said, the structure of the universe itself. The inner senses, in other words, are the means, the mental insights are the tools, and the vitality is the actual material that forms the universe as a whole. The apparent divisions within it, the apparent boundaries of the various divisions, and the diverse materials within each division. Again, the different materials within each division are only camouflages formed by the inner senses upon the material itself. I still haven't gone completely into our fifth dimension discussion, but I am rounding out our imaginary structured universe in such a way that the fifth dimension material will fit in almost effortlessly when the time comes. You have already been given a tremendous portion of material this evening. I hit upon the foreshortened time idea to save you actual practical time that you might wish to use in other matters. I will go along with it as far as I can and still achieve the best results. That is, it may tire you in ways that I am not aware of, though I doubt it. In this case, I shall of course dispense with it. Rob said, I feel okay, says. Say said, when you reread this material, you will find it more than you thought to begin with. I am quite sure, I know for a fact, that beings from other planes have appeared on your plane, sometimes on purpose and sometimes completely by accident. As in some cases, human beings have quite accidentally blundered through the apparent curtain between your present and your past. So have beings blundered into the apparent division between one plane and another. Usually, when they have done so, they were invisible to your plane, as the few who fall into the past or the apparent past were invisible to the people of the past. This sort of experience involves a sudden psychic awareness, straight from the entity, that all boundaries are for practical purposes only. However, there are indeed many kinds of sense. There are many senses just dealing with locomotion. Had the human race, for example, gone into certain mental disciplines as thoroughly as it has explored technological disciplines, its practical transportation system would be vastly different, and yet by this time even more practical than it is now. I am making this point because I want it made plain. This, dear Joseph, is a pun. That when I speak of science on another plane, I may not speak of the plain old science that you know. Now back to the point. When, however, sciences progress on various planes, then visitations become less accidental and more planned. However, since the inhabitants of each plane are bound by the materializations or materialized patterns of that plane, they bring this particular materialization pattern or camouflaged vitality pattern with them. Certain kinds of senses cannot operate without it. When the inhabitants of a plane have learned mental science patterns, then they are to a great degree freed from the more regular camouflage patterns. This applies to a higher plane than mine. Generally speaking, although my plane is further along in this science than your own, the flying saucer appearances come from a plane that is much more advanced in technological sciences than Earth at this time. However, this is still not a mental science plane. Therefore, the camouflage paraphernalia appears more or less visible to your own astonishment. Now, so strong is this tendency for vitality to change from one apparent form to another, that what you have here in your flying saucers is something that is actually as you view it, not of your plane, nor of the plane of its origin. What happens is this. When a flying saucer, as you prefer to call it, starts out toward its destination, the atoms and the molecules that structurally compose it, and which are themselves formed by vitality, are more or less aligned according to the pattern inflicted upon it in its own territory. Now, as this enters your plane, a distortion occurs. The actual structure of the craft is caught in a dilemma of form. It is caught between transforming itself completely into Earth's particular camouflage pattern and retaining its original pattern. The earthly viewer attempts to correlate what he sees with what he supposedly knows or imagines possible in the little he knows of the universe. What he sees is something between a horse and a dog and resembles neither. The craft retains what it can of its original structure and changes what it must. This accounts for much of the conflicting reports as to shape, size, and color. The few times that the craft shifts off at right angles, it has managed to retain functions ordinary to it in its particular habitat. I do not believe you will have any saucer landings for quite a while, not physical landings in the usual sense of the word. These saucers cannot stay on your plane for any length of time at all. The pressures that push against the vehicle itself are tremendous. It is literally caught between two worlds. This struggle to be one thing or the other is very great on any plane. To conform to the laws of a particular plane is a practical necessity. And at this time, the flying saucer craft simply cannot afford to stay betwixt and between for any indefinite period. What they do is take quick glimpses of your plane and hold in mind that the saucer or cigar shape seen on your planet is a bastard form having little relation to the structure as it is at home base. At a later date, I may go into the inhabitants of that plane more thoroughly, but as it is, I am not acquainted with them very much myself. There are so many things that you do not understand that I hope to explain to you. There are other things that you do not understand that I cannot explain to you, simply because they would be too alien now for your regular mode of thought. Rob asked, how about an example of what you mean? Say said, one note along these lines, a plan, and I am using your term. I will try to think of a better one. is not necessarily a planet. A plane may be one planet, but a plane may also exist where no planet is. One planet may have several planes. Planes may also involve various aspects of apparent time. This particular matter is too difficult to go into right now. However, I will continue it later. Planes can and do intermix without the knowledge of the particular inhabitants of either plane. I want to get away from the idea of a plane being a place. It may be in some cases, but it is not always. A plane may be a time. A plane, believe it or not, may be only one iota of vitality that seems to exist by itself. A plane is something apparently divided from the rest of the universe for a time and for a reason. A plane may cease to be. A plane may spring up where there was none. A plane is formed for entities as patterns for fulfillment along various levels. A plane is a climate conducive to the development of unique and particular capacities and achievements. A plane is an isolation of elements where each element is given the most possible space in which to function. Planets have been used as planes and used again as other planes. A plane is not a cosmic location. It is oftentimes practical that entities or their various personalities visit one plane before another. This does not mean that one plane must necessarily be visited before another. A certain cessation is merely more useful for the entity as a whole. In other terms, you could also say that an entity visits all planes simultaneously, as it is possible for you to visit one particular state, one particular county, one particular city at one time. Also, you might visit the state of sorrow and joy almost simultaneously, and experience both emotions in heightened state because of the almost immediate contrast between them. In fact, the analogy of a plane with an emotional state is much more valid than the analogy between a plane and a geographical state, particularly since emotional states take up no room. Ralph says, when you were speaking to us as Frank was in the second session, you said you came from the state of sorrows. She said, Frank did indeed come from the state of sorrow. He was a make-up personality. That is, through Frank I had to make up for past errors. Never a pretty proposition. These people who seem born from sorrow to sorrow are often of this type. I should not make light of Frank since almost literally he redeemed me. This plane for Frank was a plane of sorrow. I will of course make it all up to him, or try to. He has absolutely no sense of humor. I have seen Robert glance at the clock. You may take a break or end the session, as you choose. I would say that you had enough material to keep you busy. Rob says, what do you think about Jane talking to the students at Amara College this afternoon? She said, I didn't hear her speak. I know she didn't do as beautifully as she does for me in your own living room, and I am sure she spoke in her own voice. Nevertheless, I understand she came up against a Frank in point clothing. A shocking experience for anybody. She always did like to teach, and this ability is one of the carry-through traits of her various personalities. I really could keep going for hours again, but it is not a good idea. These sessions should be regular above all else. If we begin stretching them into longer sessions, within one night. You will not have time to correlate the material or to completely recover from the effort involved. I am afraid we would then end up with only one session a week, and I prefer the two. So, because of this flawless logic, and again because of my innate consideration for your convenience, I hereby bid you a fond good night. Yet, as always, I dislike parting. When I get through with what I should say, then I just feel like saying what I would like to say. I think your progress is coming along very well, and I am pleased. Robert is learning a certain discipline and controlled manner that will do his present personality great benefit. You, Joseph, are opening in one way, and gaining an added self-control and confidence in another. Good night from your old evening star. Goodbye, yes.